Jonathan, as a New York resident, I want to first of all talk to you about the note from Mr. Grant Cardone. Apparently, Grant Cardone was underwriting multiple opportunities in New York, and he has now told his team to stop all work on New York properties. New York multifamilies, going to crash or whatever's going to happen. But I was just curious, what do you think about folks choosing not to underwrite in New York?
God, I don't know. I mean, I would say, Grant, New York is not even going to notice if you're investing here or not. You're small potatoes for New York. So, you think you're big time, but you're
Not
you're a
big time for New York.
you're a pimple on the butt of something, when it comes to New York. So it makes great press, but
All right.
nobody cares. But I would say, listen, I mean, and sort of in all seriousness, though, it is tough to make money in New York. It always
Yeah.
has been, and uh, the state legislature didn't make it any easier for people a couple of years ago by basically eliminating the way to get out of rent stabilized apartments.
Yeah, I want to
So
talk about that because
yeah,
like I think it was I forget which bank it was. New York Bank, I think New York
yeah,
Bank Corp.
yeah, yeah,
They had to write down a couple of buildings and I think they were both rent stabilized. So I
yeah.
think so tell
This is
us.
the issue. Yeah, this is the issue with that bank, that they have underwritten a lot. I mean, they have in a
Yeah, they were
portfolio a huge,
overexposed.
yeah, a huge number of rent stabilized buildings, and expenses have gone up, and interest costs have gone up, and now those buildings are underwater. And the real issue with New York, and I mean, I hope that this gets fixed soon, but there doesn't really seem to be any reality on the horizon. Uh, New York has made it very difficult to build here, so the cost of living is sky high, and the politicians, having having succumbed to their constituents' desires not to have anything ever built near anybody, or
Mhm.
frankly, doesn't even have to be built near them. If they know it's being built somewhere, they're opposed to it, right?
Just
So
anywhere.
anywhere, it doesn't matter. If something's getting built somewhere, New Yorkers don't want it, right? So
Yeah.
and so they turn around and they impose rent stabilization and rent control. And there used to be, the way that the law used to work before 2019 was that when someone moved out of a rent stabilized apartment, if you made sufficient improvements,
Mhm.
you could raise the rent high enough that you could get it out of the rent stabilization regime and into free market. And then,
Oh, okay.
however, this, as you might imagine, led to a lot of abuse, where a lot of
Of course.
unscrupulous people were doing all kinds of nasty things to get people to move out, and so that they could turn the apartments. And so the state legislature, rather than like kind of increasing the penalties for that kind of behavior or whatever, they just threw out the whole baby with the bathwater, and they
Mm.
not only made it almost impossible to get out of rent stabilization no matter what you do, but
Mhm.
they even like retroactively applied it so that
Oh,
tenants
wow.
could find out if their unit was ever rent stabilized, like ever in the past, and then
Mm.
sue to have it restabilized. Like, I mean, it's just crazy, right? So
Wow.
they really have done a number on the housing market in New York, which is really the opposite. So I
Now,
mean,
as an complete outsider, what percent? I mean, are we talking 5% of New York market? Or are we
no,
talking
it's incredible. I think there are like a million rent stabilized apartments in New York City.
again? I don't know what that is on a percentage basis. I mean, got a
It's, I
wild
mean,
guess.
well, I mean, look, there's like 8.5 million people in New
All
York
right, so we're
City.
talking 12%. Oh, so
Well,
that
if you
that's
figure the
oh,
family size is three,
okay.
and I mean,
So
and
it's a
then
big number. It's
yeah, it's a big
30%.
number, and
Okay.
then half of the people own, so it's like
Yeah.
it's a large number, like 50% of apartments or something, that
Oh,
are
okay.
stabilized, and so it's it's just it's really creating a big problem. So I get Grant Cardone saying, like, it's not even worth his
Not worth
while
it.
to do
Yeah.
it. And I think that, the pain is going to start to occur in New York soon, and hopefully that will encourage
Well,
the state
let's play
legislature.
let's play this out a little bit. I guess the other thing we should point out is you don't invest in New York City
I
either,
don't.
right?
Yeah.
You chose to go other markets. So again, lots of people don't choose to invest in New York. I just thought it was interesting that
Well,
he came out and said,
yeah.
I'm going to tell
I
my
mean,
team not to do it anymore.
I'll tell you why I didn't do it in New York. And it was because when I started out, I wanted cash flow, right? And New York
Me
was
too.
was an appreciation market. And
Yeah.
just to make, just the cost of everything was so high here, and there's so much money here, and
Mm.
you're competing with, with people who just want
Behemoths.
to,
Yeah.
well, not just that, but you're competing. I mean, buying a major building is just unrealistic anyway, but even buying something like triplexes in New York
Mhm.
City, you're competing with people who are just buying it for a house, right? And they fall
Yeah.
in love with the house and they'll pay anything for it. And
Yeah.
you're trying to like make money off it. And, people
Yeah.
were telling me if you're not able to put down 50%, you can't make it cash flow.
Yeah.
And so that just didn't make any sense to me at all. I wanted to have cash flowing property. So, but now that was before 2019. So it's now even more difficult
Yeah, I
because
want to try to play this out with you because again, this is fascinating to me. So people buy into these buildings that are rent stabilized with one plan. The government comes in and changes the rules of the game mid-flight.
yeah,
That then devalues what they've purchased. Oh, by the way, we've seen the largest run of inflation since the 70s.
right.
Um, you probably had some folks stop paying rent, so your income or revenue collection is down. And you're not only not debt servicing the building, but you're not doing maintenance and all of these things. So this feels like it's going to come to a head with some landlord handing the keys back to banks.
Yeah,
Then banks, I mean, if you play this out, unless the rules change back or there's an exception, these buildings are going to be resold at 30 cents on the dollar, perhaps.
yeah,
Because if they have
yeah.
to cash flow as rent stabilized, that's just a different price.
Yeah, I mean it's true, and now the way the rent stabilization system works though is every year there's this rent stabilization board that
Okay.
sets the amount of rent increases that can take place,
Hmm.
and so if you have a lot of inflation, then at least in theory they will raise that cap, and in the
In theory, in
in
theory,
theory,
yeah.
but I mean generally they do like it's
Okay.
historically been like 3% on average that they
Oh,
allow
all
people
right. That's not
to
bad.
raise rent. So it's not like they can't raise rents at all. I think the problem is that a lot of the expenses, so it's two things, right? It's that old insurance rate hike. If people bought with floating rate debt, then they're screwed. But it's
Oh,
also
yeah.
that I think inflation was a lot more than 3%, and the
Hmm.
rents haven't gone up. And I don't, and they only meet once a year, that rent stabilization board, to decide on the rent hikes. So what we have been seeing supposedly, there's supposedly there are something like 60,000 apartments being held off the market because they're in such bad condition that it doesn't make sense to renovate them. Because what they did, what this was the really stupid thing that they did, they
Mm.
basically capped the amount you could spend on a renovation for an apartment. So
No.
yeah,
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 no. What? Why?
they basically,
Why would they do that?
because they who knows,
I mean,
so
that's
they
it. That's
base
like you can grade the apartment. What?
yeah, they capped it I mean, you could spend whatever you want, but you can
Hmm.
only recoup $15,000
Oh,
in
I got it.
rent
Got it.
increases, right?
Got it. Okay.
So
Now
so
I
you
understand.
and it's over a really long period of time too. It's not like you can get the 15,000 back this year. It's like
Mm,
you can get 15,000 back over 15 years. It's something moronic, right? So
right. Okay.
um
So
so
you
the
have a
whole
lot
thing,
of landlords with just shells that like, hey, not worth it not worth to remodel this one. We'll just keep it empty.
yeah, I mean, and listen, if I frankly, I think that the landlords are doing the landlord association just brought a case to the Supreme Court, which the Supreme Court bounced, because
Yeah,
listen, this is
well,
within,
they declined to hear it, right? I read
yeah,
that over
because
the
this is
weekend.
like it's completely within the state's power to do
Yeah,
this. This is like a
it's
classic
a
federalism
state
issue
thing.
that,
Yep.
so if the state wants to be stupid, the Supreme Court is not going to stop them. But the thing is
This
that,
state wants to be stupid. The Fed's not gonna. That was good.
I mean, listen,
Sorry.
it's the
That was
fact of the
funny.
matter. But I'm funny even when I'm funny when I'm not trying to be, and then when I'm
That
trying to be,
was
it doesn't work.
hilarious.
But so the landlords association here has been kind of wasting a lot of time on stuff like lawsuits
Yeah.
rather than doing what I think they should be doing is like they should be putting out a lot of like publicity campaigns, like showing the condition of some of these apartments and like how much it's going to cost to renovate them. And then just making the case like, you know, like what would you do? Like Mr.
Mhm.
Average New Yorker, like would you spend $100,000 or $200,000
Yeah.
to get this apartment into shape when the state of New York tells you you're only allowed to recoup $15,000 of your investment? And look how crappy this is. Would anybody want to live here? I mean,
Right.
I've seen some of these apartments that people live in because they're paying ridiculously low rent and they don't want to give it up, but the
Mhm.
landlords don't make repairs because they they can't afford to.
Yeah.
It's insane. So
Yeah.
I the whole thing is so ass backwards. And
Well, if New
I
York wants to be stupid, there's probably good reasons Grant and others don't want to invest there.
yeah,
Also, appreciation versus cash flow. So it makes complete sense to me. I actually want to switch gears to Ken McElroy.
okay.
Ken McElroy, I think we've talked about him before. John Bird's Real Estate Consulting, which is an analyst firm, which I deeply respect, has put out some numbers that I think are actually, frankly, saying Ken McElroy's right. So what is Ken McElroy right? Ken McElroy is basically saying that the next 2 years are going to be painful. There's going to be losses absorbed. But if, like him, like you, Jonathan, didn't get stupid and buy bad deals on short-term bridge debt the next 2 years, you're going to have buying opportunities. Also, to all the doomers out there, you're right. There's a lot of inventory coming, but it does seem to be very concentrated. I have a list again from John Burns I'll read in a minute, but there appears to be a lot of opportunity because the inventory, once delivered, there's nothing behind it and all of that. So could be great buying opportunities for the next 2 years as we unjuggle or unwrap the pain from stupidity, and the inventory will cap or peak in 2025. So we could be set up for great buying opportunities and some appreciation thereafter. What do you think?
Yeah, but you're going to need cash,
Well, you're
right?
going to need, that's
You're
right. You're going to need deep pockets. Yep.
you're going to
Yep.
need cash for this because a lot of these properties, there will be the opportunity for a lot of people to buy like brand spanking new Class A buildings for pennies on the dollar, or partially rehabbed older buildings
That's
for
the
pen,
one I think's coming. Yeah.
for pennies on the dollar. But you can't finance these, right? Because they're not going to be stabilized.
Correct.
They're not going to meet the requirements for Fannie and Freddie. Maybe you can find a local bank who's willing to do it, but more likely people are going to have to go, if they want to borrow money on these, they're going to have to go to bridge lenders who are very expensive right now. So
Oh, yeah,
I
they
mean,
are.
that will further drive down the price of these properties most likely,
No, no, exactly. This is what, again,
but
I can't believe how similar this is to last time, right?
yeah,
Everybody talks about last time about single family homes. I was doing it long enough to realize the single family homes changed, and then there was still pain left in multifamily. It was like either you deal with the bank that's got the debt, or you'll pay cash and you pay pennies on the dollar
yeah.
because there was no way to get lending.
Yeah, and so that's going to happen again. So if you have the cash, then you'll be able to buy these deals. There'll be some great opportunities. And like I've said before, I mean, I don't think this is limited to larger properties. I think you're going to see
Oh,
this
I
in
think you're
smaller
right.
properties too. So maybe, look around and see you may be able to pick up a nice little property for a couple $100,000 if you've got that in the bank, or you and your friends can put the money together, or maybe take a very small, go invert the capital stack and do, you know 60 of equity and 40 of debt or something like that, just to
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
extend and get a little bit of leverage, right? But
Hmm.
going very, very conservative, that may convince a bank that they can take a risk on you. The banks are going to be very skittish, right? Because they're going to be hurting. So you've got to kind of make a case. But if you put your best foot forward and you've got cash, there will be opportunities for sure. And then, absorption will do its thing.
Hmm.
And as you say, this supply is going to dry up. I mean, this is just, all that's happening here is just the classic real estate cycle.
Yeah.
This is
Exactly.
the real estate cycle, right? When people are like, what's going on, right? No,
Yeah.
this is, if you look at the classic real estate cycle that was kind of, identified by Dr. Glenn Mueller, right?
Hmm.
It basically describes exactly the process that we're seeing right now. We're putting aside the whole interest rate hike thing, which has made the whole everything worse and has kind of obscured the picture of what's going on a bit. But if you look at the Sunbelt cities, they just exhibit the classic pattern of, when times are good and rents are rising really fast, all the banks and all the developers jump in and they all start lending and building like crazy. And they do it until they create an oversupply situation. And
Hmm.
when they create an oversupply situation, then rents start falling, and then immediately the banks stop lending and the construction pipeline dries up.
Yep.
And then you get, that's when the new cycle starts and basically bottoms out. And when you have enough natural absorption that takes place, which usually takes, you know, 12 to 24 months,
Hmm.
right? Then when rents start rising again and prices start rising again on assets, then the banks start feeling more
Then they start
comfortable
opening,
to
and yeah, it's
lending. They
it's like
start
a
lending. They lend a
six
little
or
bit.
6 to 10 year. You can,
Yeah.
if you get in right, you can have a 6 or 10 year window where the wind's at your back.
Yeah. I mean, this is why I always think, like, given how long development takes, like right now, like now is the time to start developing, right? Like to be like releasing your property into that no supply situation, right? I mean, it's always kind of mystified me as to why nobody really does. I mean, and when you say nobody, there are people who are doing this, right? It's just that the supply drops a lot. It's not like there's zero
Mhm.
supply.
Right.
People exaggerate. There's just going to be very little supply
Yeah.
coming online after 2026. But this is, the way you take advantage of it is by buying cheap. And
Yeah.
if you buy stuff, I mean, that's where the real serious wealth is made. When you're buying stuff for pennies on the dollar at the bottom of the cycle, and
Yeah.
you just are, you know, going up with the cycle. I mean,
Mhm.
that is how you get rich doing this thing.
I'm curious, right? You've been in the syndication space. You have syndicated. You're still syndicating. You've done a couple of boutique hotels, for example. You're starting to evaluate deals now. I'm curious. You were not really in the market kind of when it got nutty and crazy because you're
Yeah.
conservative. I am curious because you're probably plugged into a lot of folks. Where's the pain level or freaking out? Because there's a lot of people that did, now in hindsight, bad deals. Is the pain building or stress building, or is it still kind of?
Well, so I mean, we haven't seen a lot of foreclosures hit yet.
Mhm.
I haven't heard scuttlebutt from, like, I know some syndicators. They're not people that I know well, but I know some syndicators who have been in the news with foreclosures, right?
Mhm.
But amongst the people that I know well, I have not heard anything, and I haven't heard any LPs talking about
Oh, okay.
deals that they're in getting foreclosed on. But the LPs all say that basically none of their deals are paying any distributions. And the
Mm,
reason for that is that once interest rates started to go up, basically every deal that got done in 21 and 22 was using floating rate debt with a rate
yeah.
cap, because it was kind of the competition became so ridiculous. It was really
Mhm.
the only way to get deals was to just get those few extra basis points that allowed you to, like, pay a few extra bucks, because everyone else was doing it, right?
Right.
You couldn't get deals. And so everybody was doing that. All of the syndicators were following the same model. And um, so what happened was, once the interest rate started going up, first of all, they had to pay more in interest, but
Sure.
they also started looking down down the road and seeing, I'm going to have to buy a new rate cap in 18 months or 24 months. And the cost of that rate cap has doubled or tripled,
Well,
right?
I had a syndicator. Does this seem possible? One of the syndicators I know said is the rate cap he bought, I don't know, call it 21. I don't remember, 21 or 22 was something like 50 or 60 grand. His new quote was 500 grand,
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean,
10x. Oh,
yeah.
wow. Okay.
Oh, absolutely. No, this is very common.
Okay.
So, so what, so what we're seeing is the good operators, right? And now listen, unbelievably, there are some operators who didn't buy rate caps at all.
Oh,
I mean, that boggles
they're
my, I mean,
done.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't do floating rate debt. I didn't even want to do floating rate debt like for my house, right?
Yeah, me neither. It's not
Yeah,
good.
so why would I do it with investor money in a deal?
Mm.
But um, but like you said, I was out of that was one of the reasons I was out. Like I just
Mhm.
didn't feel like I could compete on terms that made me comfortable.
Right.
So um, but so there are those syndicators who didn't even buy rate cap, and they're those guys are just cooked. I mean, but
Mm.
the even the ones who did, the people who bought rate caps, and they were all following all the research, all the SOFR curves, and all this kind of stuff, and it said that they were doing what they thought was the right thing at the time. They bought rate caps, but the smart operators, the dumb operators who bought rate caps put their head in the sand. The
Mhm.
smart operators stopped distributions and started building up a war chest to
Yeah.
buy the rate cap, so they
To
would
fight another day, right? That's
yeah,
what
so
trying to
that they
get to the other
wouldn't have
side.
to so they wouldn't have to do a capital call, right, or something like that. So the the so I know a number of people who they're not paying distributions, but their deals are they're running in a very healthy way, like on an operating
Okay.
basis. They're very profitable, but
Are
they're
you
not
hearing
making
a lot about capital calls? I mean, because you could stop distribution, then there's capital calls, then there's kind of lose your money.
yeah.
You know,
So there are deals with capital calls out there. And again, there's a variety of capital calls out there, right? There is the Hail Mary capital call, which
mhm.
is not going to help and you shouldn't participate in it, right?
Mhm.
If the operator doesn't have a really uh, you know, thought out plan for how exactly the capital call is going to bridge the gap to get
How are we going to be on the better after this? Yeah.
right. What does the capital call get you? Does it preserve your ability to fight another day? Or is this a calculated way of making sure that you get your capital back
Mhm.
because would just get you, buy another rate cap, get you through the trough and back into a rising market, and then can refinance or sell at a better time. If that's what the capital call is for, then yeah, it's something that you should really consider participating in because
Mhm.
it's getting you something. But there are other people out there making capital calls who are the problem is they're not good operators, right? So on an operating base, it's not if the capital call is because you've got a good operator who's having trouble because of the way that the debt market changed,
Mhm.
that is a different situation than a capital call by a bad operator, right?
Yeah.
Someone who's like the property operations are not working because they don't know what they're doing. That
Right.
is good money after bad. So there's a big distinction between the two, right? So if you're getting capital calls, you really need to dig in to to why you're having the capital call. And the good operators are really treating this like a new capital raise all over. I mean, they're really selling it to their investors, saying that this is why we need the capital call. This is why we need you to participate. This is what we believe is going, is the benefit of having the capital call. The good operators will also tell you, like, look, if we didn't think the capital call was going to, help this deal survive, then we would just be honest with you and say, look, the best option here is just to hand the keys to the
Yeah.
bank
Let it
and
go. Yeah.
minimize the loss. Like we're not going to ask you to put more money in to a deal that can't be helped. So a good operator will tell you that. A bad operator is not going to tell you that, right? There. So, um, but yeah, what I'm seeing is uh, some capital calls, but a lot of deals from good operators that are just building up war chests and not making distributions. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to definitely be interesting to kind of see this unwind. Kind of an off-wall question that just came to me is do you think at the end of this pain cycle, which I still think has a couple of years, do you think the government gets involved and new regulations come in? Because again, these are all, at least most of them are accredited investors. Do you think there's enough squawking and pain where the rules change or not really?
I mean, I'll tell you what I'm a little concerned about
Okay.
is that the accredited investor definition has not been indexed to inflation, and it hasn't changed
Ah,
since
yes.
like 1980 or something, and or 1990. It's been a really long time.
Yeah.
So essentially they have just left the definition in place for such a long time that if it had been indexed to inflation, pretty much 2/3 of the people who are now accredited would not be accredited.
Well, let me play this out for the audience. So again, I think it was actually like 1983 or 86 or something.
Yeah.
The accredited investor came out. There's a couple of ways, but we'll just say net worth of $1 million, not including your primary home.
That was the last change they made, apparently, was that it used to include your house,
Yeah,
and then they changed it to exclude your house. So they
but
did change
yeah,
that. But other than that, they left the income and net worth requirements in place.
right.
And so right now, you know, if you have an income of $200,000, you're accredited, but if it were indexed to inflation, it would take an income of $600,000, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so
And then
essentially,
$1 million becomes $4 million,
yeah,
right? It's a very
I think it's
different game
three, it's
or
three or
whatever.
something, but yeah,
Yeah,
but not including your primary residence.
right.
And so I mean, listen, I think that the whole accredited investor definition is like a really ham-fisted way to try to decide who understands the risks of these investments. Maybe
Hmm.
the thinking originally was that, well, look, if you make enough money, you can afford to lose.
Yeah, yeah. If
And
you make enough money, we don't care about you. Go do whatever the heck you
well,
want.
yeah, you can afford it. So we're just not gonna worry about trying to determine whether you're,
Would
you
you
know,
like some kind of test? I mean, are we going that direction? Is that what you're thinking?
I don't know, but I think we could go in that direction. And I'll tell you why I think that might happen. Because the if the whole idea of having an accredited investor status in the first place is to kind of like protect people from themselves,
Right.
then um then that's not the only way to do it, right?
Hmm.
Just
Hmm.
and the other thing is that, you know, the not just real, I mean, you and I focus on real estate, so that's all we
Hmm.
think about, but the entire startup
Yes.
economy is dependent on this as well, right? So
Hmm.
if you were to suddenly say that, well, two-thirds of the people who are currently qualified to invest in a startup can't do it anymore, the whole startup economy is over. And,
Yeah.
you know, the whole point of the Jobs Act in 2016 was to make it easier. They weren't thinking about real estate. They were
Hmm.
thinking about startups. They were to make
Yep.
it easier for startups to raise money because startups are like the job creation
Hmm.
engine of the
Hmm.
economy. So they wanted to make it easier for people to raise money for startups. So raising the accredited investor definition without doing anything else would just basically wipe
Yep.
that off the map. And so um, or just put it in the hands of Wall Street, right? Which is the other thing that scares me, because I'm sure Wall Street would be very happy to have the accredited investor definition
Yeah.
changed so that they could be the only ones who get all the money to do this kind of private, private
Yep.
investing.
Private equity banking. Yeah.
So so that could be a pressure on the SEC as well. Like all the banks, whispering in the SEC's ear, like these people can't take care of themselves. You need to protect them, right?
Yeah.
And so that could happen. But I think if the if the definition is changed without some alternative basis for becoming accredited, I think they would just wipe out that whole ecosystem.
Mm.
So that's why I think that potentially they might not, or if they do change the definition, what they'll do is create some kind of test to allow
Got it.
people to prove that they're accredited without having the income, the $600,000 of income, because that's just a very, very small number of people.
Yeah. Well, folks, at the end of the day, I think it makes perfect sense why Grant Cardone and others don't invest in New York. I do think there are some people that will be picking up some rent stabilized apartments for cheap, cheap, cheap if they don't change the rules, because that math just doesn't work. It
Yeah.
just doesn't work. Also, I like Ken McElroy, what he's saying, because I think there's a lot of opportunity to do the work. Jonathan, if somebody wanted to get in your world, see what's going on, where would they go?
Yeah, so these days I'm really focused on LinkedIn. Facebook, they change their algorithm so much that people can join my group and comment, and I don't even see it anymore.
Oh my
So
gosh.
yeah, it's they killed a good thing there. So but I'm very active on LinkedIn. I post a lot, I comment a lot. You can directly engage in a conversation with me on LinkedIn, which is great. So just come and look for me on LinkedIn and
Very cool.
connect with me there.
Jonathan, you're amazing, man. Thanks, and we'll talk next week.
Thank you.
Mhm.